Welcome to Punch Keys Podcast. I'm Poppy Minix, your co-host, bringing you blunt talk for the fiction novelist.
And I'm Cascade, your other writerly co-host. If you love to ramble about writing and need a tribe, you found us.
Are you ready? We're uncorking now. Let's talk about punching those keys.
Guess what time it is?
Is it podcast time?
It's totally podcast time. Welcome to Punch Keys. We are here today to talk to you about Protagonist. And no, we haven't tried to do this episode already 2 times before.
What?
And are doing it again. What? No way. We don't redo episodes. Why would we do that?
Oh, man. Some days the words just don't come. It's like writing. It's like drawing.
Or sometimes the words do come a lot for us, but they only make sense to us when we listen back to them. We're like, oh, wow, we totally didn't finish that thought.
Yes.
Oh, wow, look at us, little bossy pants.
That happens too.
Yeah. So, we try to fix that stuff. And if we get bossy pants on you, then I don't know.
We don't mean to.
Shout at us to take off our pants. I don't know. Or maybe don't. That's going to get weird. Don't do that. Don't do that.
It's going to get weird. Oh, man.
But there's a reason. It's usually important episodes that we find ourselves wanting to redo because there's so much to hit and to say it right, and Protagonist is one of those things.
Yes.
I mean, that's where the story starts.
Quite
if you
literally.
have an unlikable, boring, flat protagonist, your story is going to be the same.
Yes.
But we all know that. The hard part then comes into, well, how do you make them interesting?
Yes.
That's a lot of pressure. It's tons of pressure.
It is.
So we're going to talk about that.
All right. So what is a protagonist to you, Cass?
I had to think about this for a while because Protagonist I struggle with.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I thought I struggled with them, but I realized something about my process in developing a protagonist. I was like, I always focus on the world. I always focus on the antagonist, the side characters, the theme, the emotional arcs. These are the things. And so my protagonist is always like this weird mystery cloud of rainbow dust that I can't figure out. And I was thinking about it more and more, and it's not that they're a rainbow, it's that they're the centerpiece, and all of the things I'm working on show different parts of my protagonist. Yeah. So their relationships with each of the side characters, their actions that motivate the antagonist, the overall theme and message of the story, how they interact with the world building. I mean, the world building is great to have because I'm fantasy, so I always have huge world building right here in modern day. That's my favorite thing, is the magic hidden behind the layers. Mm-hmm. And which is fun, but the real thing is how the protagonist interacts with that, how they react to it, how they use it, how they learn it. And that's how I discover my protagonist, is through all the threads of my story. They all go back to the protagonist, which is entirely different for you, though. Yes,
my protagonist is everything. It's in romance, your protagonist or your protagonists, the two of them, that's the story. That's where all your plot comes from. That's where your themes come from. That's where absolutely everything lands, is within the protagonist. The antagonist is a piece of it, but the antagonist doesn't necessarily have to be a bad guy. It can be an inner thought. It can be a storm. It can be all kinds of different things, but the protagonist is the one where it all begins. And that's how my process starts, is I think about people and their relationship. It's not with a scene. It's not with a plot. It's with two people and how they get along and how they fit with each other. So my process always starts with two people.
So how do you, when you're starting out with two people, how do you make two interesting people?
Interesting people comes with chemistry when you're bouncing off of each other, because when you have romance, that's what you're doing. Your interest comes between the two of them, not necessarily the one. They can both be interesting, but it's their togetherness and the way that their banter, and it all revolves around what happens between them. So that is the interesting parts when it comes to romance. That's what people want to see. You want to sit there and watch something unfurl. You want to watch the spark, the glimmer. You want to see what's going on. You want somebody to be witty and poke at each other. And so for me, the interest comes between two different personalities and how they interact. And then making them personable. I mean, it's always really fun to me to watch people. I just love people, which is how I ended up being a romance author. I love watching that. I like seeing how people meet each other and interact with each other, and the awkwardness sometimes, and then the boldness sometimes, and the way that they can bring out the best and the worst of each other. I just love that. So that's where my protagonists lay. That's where all the interesting stuff happens for me, is those interactions.
And I think a lot of that can be done outside of romance too. So like the interesting part of having characters that bring out different attributes in a character, or the comedy and the complete opposites of them, or the bonding and traits that are exactly the same. I think that can happen with characters that aren't romantic, the characters that are friends, characters that are family, characters that are the coach who cuts you from the team, is actually trying to teach you a lesson, or whatever your story or genre is. Because as humans, we all react to different things differently, right?
Yes.
We don't treat all of our friends the same. We don't do the same things with them. We're more comfortable talking about certain things than other things with certain friends. Sometimes we're on our worst behavior or our best behavior with our family. Sometimes we will like pick an argument just even if we don't really believe in it, but we know it's going to push someone's button, and we just
right.
Like all of these things, that little ticks and traits, we don't act the same in every moment in our lives. And so finding those layers with your protagonist is really fun. There has to be obviously like a core. There has to be a reason why they're reacting in each scene that all comes back to the same core of who they are.
Yes.
Do you ever focus on the core of your character? How do you build that?
Backstory. I mean, the core of them is who they are. And it is one of those things where you don't necessarily need to drop all the backstory stuff, or at least, I don't, but I need to know who they are. So I need to sit and think about how they got to the way that they are. They can't just be, snarky about dogs just because.
Because it's funny in this particular scene.
Right?
When there's a dog in the park jumping on her.
And they're like, and the other person's just laughing, and it's like,
It's
why?
better if she doesn't like dogs for the scene.
Right? Or why? Or what happened to make her not like the dog? Like, I want to know why, and when's that going to happen again? And making it interesting, because we all are people, right?
And making it believable. So if you want that trait, you go build the backstory.
Yes.
I like how you said you don't put all your backstory in there, because that's kind of an interesting topic among writers. Some writers get really frustrated with having excessive backstory and not using the words. They feel like it's wasted words. Like any words they type out and write, they want to use in their novel.
Yeah.
I am not that person, and that's okay if you are, but I will have so much backstory and so much stuff that I've written that never goes in my novel, but it makes me understand my character, and I'm consistent in their reactions and their core because I've written out. Sometimes I have where I have scenes that I will never use, but I had to because like I have a protagonist, her dog dies, and so I needed to like see that scene to understand her, because she remembers her dog and she thinks about her dog throughout the story. And so I'm like, I have to see that scene and why she's still remembering that and holding on to that so much. And so I wrote it all out as a short story. That's never going in the novel. That's
the deleted scenes, the extras. Yeah.
But now that I've lived that moment with her, I understand when she has emotion.
Yeah. And it's for big things. You don't have to write out, what happened from birth until the present day. But just knowing those big, huge points, if there was a massive emotional thing that happened to them, like why? Like one of my characters, her parents were killed and she found them, right? That is not in the book. But I wrote it out I thought I was going to start my book there, but then I ended up starting it. And this was when I first started writing. It was like a 5-chapter flashback. And then you got to the present story. And I'm like, no, this isn't going to work.
No.
This isn't going to work. This is not what we do. And so that 5 chapters is hanging out in one of my discard, but still hanging on to files, because it was it was like the literal reason she is who she is. And she's almost villainous to that point, but this is what made her that day, and I needed that. I needed to know everything that happened. I needed to know everything that she felt in that second to understand why she acts the way she does now. But it's not for everything. I mean, I didn't need to know too much more over that, but just having that backstory and knowing what happened, it wasn't wasted words, because I really know the core of who she is now. So,
and I think it's those defining moments that motivate your character throughout the plot that are really worth digging into.
Yes.
It's so different to have one line of, well, her parents were murdered in front of her. That's why she's this way.
Right.
And then if you write a short story about it and you see the psychology going through her head when it happens, the things that she's telling herself in inner dialogue, what tics she has in those emotions, how she reacts to it, that changes. You all of a sudden know all of this coloring of personality details.
Yes.
And that is something you'll be able to use in the book, even if you don't use the scene.
Exactly. Yep.
So,
and that was huge. That was like a massive point, and I can always reference back to it too. If you're in a scene and it's like, if she has to explain something, how would she say it after experiencing everything? How would you, where's that filter go? Like, what is she going to say when she spills what actually happened? I think it adds so much more reality to everything. If you've been in that emotional state with them, kind of understand where they were coming from, you get it. But I just really dislike when I'm reading something and it logically doesn't make sense to me, or they fly off the handle and you never know why. That always makes me nuts. I think there's a way to deliver why certain things happen in a very easy format where it's not overbearing and it's not, oh wait, you need to read these 5 chapters first before you understand any of this. I think that you can make it tiny and make little teeny, even a sentence or 2 points to kind of this is why they're acting this way. So it's not necessarily that they're acting wrong. It's that they're not explaining why they're acting. So there's both ways. You either go too much sometimes or not enough, because if they're just doing something and I don't know why, I get frustrated with them. But if it's too much, I'm like, okay, just get to the story now. Oh my God.
If you're hearing a cat howling, it's not in your head.
It's not. It's my cat. I'm going to have to block that out. Apologies.
No,
it's a different time of day, and they decided that they want to yowl at me because I locked them out. Yes. They're letting themselves be known.
But I think that's a really good topic that you have here. It's about how much you share and what's too much and what's too little. And a lot of that, too, I think, is inner dialogue. How you tackle that.
Yes.
And you can use flashbacks. That's a tool that people use. I tend to shy away from it, but I recently went in and researching it, and I mean, there is a good place to put a flashback. I read in an article that it's don't do more than 2 flashbacks a book, and don't let your flashbacks be more than 500 words. There's always exceptions to everything, but that was a guideline that I saw. I was like, okay. So so especially when you're talking about when there's a huge impactful moment, like the death of your parents.
Sorry. God, I'm going to go let him out in a second. Sorry. Death of your parents.
Why don't you go do that? I'll wait.
Hang on one second.
Yep.
Jean-Paul.
She totally named her cat Jean-Paul. Is that not the coolest thing ever?
Okay. They have been released from their prison. I cannot guarantee that they will not be on my
face. On your
back, face, yowling. Yeah, we'll see how it goes.
Okay, so we're looking at what's too much and what's too little, and I like talking about that.
Yes.
Okay, so if you're looking at when to share information and what's too much and what's too little, I always look at my inner dialogue first. Because it's like when you get to know someone, if they're having an emotional reaction to something or they're feeling emotions to something, they don't sit down and tell you why every time they've had that emotion in their life and why it's so big for them right then. They give you little snippets, right? I mean, there are people who do that, but those are like the people I'm usually trying to run away from.
Right?
Right. They're the people that like you go to dinner and you sit down with them and they don't stop talking and they tell you their entire life story.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And you're just like, oh my God.
This is awkward.
Yeah. So I feel like learning a character in a story can be like that.
Mm-hmm.
If you feel like you have to give all of these giant flashbacks and all of this is why, this is so you know, and you can give it in little tidbits in inner dialogue.
Yeah, yes.
Like it's okay to say, oh, she still remembers her childhood dog who died in her arms.
Right.
I don't have to give the whole scene and how the dog was protecting her and that's why it died. And like, I can share more of that later on through other inner dialogue and little snippets.
Yeah.
Because it's not present time.
Yes.
So there's this tricky balance of telling the story in present time and getting lost in telling the story before the story.
Yes.
I
And
really-
this is also a big thing for when show and tell comes up. You're going to hear that a lot when you're writing is like show first tell and that sort of thing. Like showing would be they go to the park, a dog jumps on them and she's like, ugh, why? And then they have a dialogue conversation about, you know, a couple little snips of like, ugh, just like back in the day and this dog bit me and this is why I have this scar and oh, the scar on her face was blue, 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 you know, like different showing versus her having a flashback of the dog and telling you in her internal dialogue exactly what happened word for word. So I don't know. And I like the action portions. I want to see it.
And that's a really good point, too. So you have to look at anytime you're having a flashback or you're giving backstory, so we've decided backstory is a huge part in how you develop an interesting protagonist.
Yes.
So what you do with that backstory, so we've decided you can't put in the short stories that you've written if you've done that. But it's the emotional reactions that they feel, their body reactions. And then you look at, I think that was a really great example because it's not just your inner dialogue you can play with, it's your outer dialogue.
Yeah.
Make your outer dialogue with other characters do something for you.
Yes.
Make it reveal information and facts. I have a hard time with my outer dialogue because I always want to, like, my characters are, like, closed off. They don't want to reveal stuff about themselves, and that's a cast trait. That's not my characters. And so, but that's what my head automatically does. It's like, oh, well, she doesn't know them. Why would she share information about herself? Who does that?
Right.
Well, everyone but you, Cass. So I have to, like... push myself out of my box and be like, okay, she's going to randomly share information about herself right now. And it's not random. Like, the conversation prompts it and the scene and she was asked it, but instead of avoiding the question like I would want to do and deflecting and asking a question about them and distracting them, my character needs to actually answer it and give information up and open up. And I'm like, oh, are you really going to do that? Okay.
Yep.
This
yes,
is scary.
you are.
This is scary. Good luck, girl.
It is. But, you know, and that's why your other characters are there, too. You know, I've heard some really great things of pretend, and Cass will like this one because it's stage related. Like, make sure that everybody on stage is a paid position. You know, you're not just going to have a random person standing there without lines, without any purpose. Everybody should be interacting to show what's happening with the protagonist. So they're there specifically so that you learn the full story, because if you just have the one, sure, that one can tell a story, but it's going to end up being them telling the story and there's no other interaction between anything else. Then, you know, that's going to be hard.
There was a really awesome writing exercise that I ran into once, and it was the Great Gatsby writing exercise. And what you did is you did a big, fancy, glorious party, and you put all of the characters from your book in that party.
Oh, neat.
And then you send a character in that is not your protagonist. Your protagonist is the only person who's not at the story. And you send in like a detective or a random person who's going in, and their job is to learn who the protagonist is by asking questions to all the other characters in the book.
Oh, that's super cool.
And it was really good because the writing exercise, it tells you not everyone should like your protagonist.
Yeah.
Not everyone should hate your protagonist.
Right.
Not everyone should know them in the same way and at the same depth.
everybody has their perceptions because of what's been built from history and what they know and rumors and everything else. That's really smart. I like that.
Right. And so you go through the party, and that way, when you do put that character on the stage, you know how they see the protagonist, how they're reacting to them. And that is showing something. That is revealing something about your protagonist by how all the characters around them react to them.
Yeah.
And then there's the double layer on that of how they react to that reaction. And so you can
like
stop there. You don't have to keep going down that react.
Sure.
It's just those first ones, the side character's reaction and then the protagonist's reaction to the reaction. And don't go down that rabbit hole because you could.
Because you can forever.
Yeah, it reveals a lot. And sometimes you can use outer dialogue. Sometimes you can use inner dialogue. Sometimes you can use actual movement and blocking because that can show stuff too. I took a course. I tend to take courses on the Writer's Digest. They're online courses. I love them. And one of them, they did a little jewel about how your outer dialogue, inner dialogue, and blocking and movement should all be a third of the story.
Nice.
And that doesn't have to be for every scene in every chapter, because obviously like a big fight scene is going to have more movement. A sit-down talk with your sister is going to have more outer dialogue maybe. But as a whole, your story, you should be using those three methods equally throughout.
Neat.
And I think that's something to really look at with your protagonists when you're trying to reveal them. There are 3 different ways to reveal stuff, and make sure you're bopping between all 3. And you're using your characters. You're using your costuming to show stuff. Yeah. What they wear, what they're comfortable in, what they're uncomfortable in, what they notice in other people's clothing, what they notice in the setting.
Yes.
What foods they want for comfort.
And noticing is a big thing too, because I've seen where there's some, it almost gets to be too many details. And again, this is also a romance thing. But when you're walking into a room and this, I think goes with any genre though, is that when you have your protagonist is somebody, I have a cat in my lap, is going to be somebody who, it's their life. You're seeing it, you're being plopped into a scene, you're being plopped into action, you're being plopped into the story. So the stuff that matters to them is the stuff that they're seeing that's new. You know, it's not necessarily them going out to do these massive descriptions of like what their car looks like, what they look like. You know, they're not going to be delivering these things that they're already very familiar with. But that doesn't mean that you can't see what they like by. I really like what you said there, Cass, with the how they see other people's outfits. Like, what do they see in their world that makes them who they are? And not necessarily the things that they have in the scene setting that they're already in. You're not going to walk into your room and be like, oh, I love these green walls and that I painted 3 years ago. You know, it's just not going to happen because those are your green walls that you see every day. So they're just,
and pick the details that matter. So if your character is poor, doesn't have a lot of money, they may not go into depth of their car every time they see it.
Right.
But
another person would.
Well, make sure when they're getting in that you hear the creak from the rust.
Right. Yes.
You know what I mean? And you don't have to go into in-depth, but that little detail. Oh, it's rusted. Oh, it's an old car? Right. They don't have a lot of money. Why would they not have an old rusted car? Right. And so it's amazing, too, how tiny little, like you don't need a lot of words for those details.
You don't.
I don't need to go into where she bought the car and what name she's given it, and maybe later on, like if another character asks her and it comes up, but it has to organically come up.
Yes.
Forcing that backstory in is going to halt your pacing for me. I'm also like a zip-de-doo-dah, zip through my pacing so fast. I have to go back in and slow myself down.
Like, pause. We need a tiny pause moment. That's so funny.
But when
this goes with stages of editing too, though. I mean, your stages of editing are, get that story out, start in the details. This is round 1, round 2, round 3, round 4. So
my round 2 almost always includes adding more inner dialogue of my protagonist.
Yes.
Pausing and slowing down my pacing. And I think it's really common to have the opposite problem, where it's too much and people have to go in and cut it out. Either way, it's finding that balance and looking at the 3-prong ways to reveal, and it's looking at it instead of like, oh, this information is so amazing, I have to have it. Okay, cool, you have to have it. You have to have it here and in this format.
Right.
Does it organically come up? And if you've been showing everything through inner dialogue, is there a way to show this through a conversation or through action?
Yes, absolutely.
So
I like that a lot.
Yeah, something to look at when you're revealing things about your protagonist.
Yes. And it's the organic factor too. It is those, like, make sure there's a moment there if you need to say something that makes sense, that isn't just out of the blue. Unless you have a completely random talking character that says everything in their head and then all of a sudden they blurt out something out loud and people are like, where in the hell did that come from? Because those are funny too, but the character, you know, the reader still needs to know like what's happening there, and it has to be a consistent you know, through the story kind of thing. But I really like those organic moments where it's like, oh, that's what happened there. It wasn't because you told me in chapter 1. It was because you hinted at it and I was starting to put some things together. And now all of a sudden you have a moment to say, this is what happened there. That's so neat.
And that's a good point too, is your reader needs to attach to your protagonist before they care about that stuff.
Yes.
So you have more leeway in the second half of the book to give a little bit more details and to open up more about stuff. And I think it goes back to that dinner conversation with someone you're meeting. When you first sit down with someone at the dinner table and you're just meeting them and they vomit their whole life to you, it's like, oh, it's so intense. God, but if they they're talk to you and give you little tidbits and it's a conversation back and forth, you're intrigued. So then a month later, when you've seen them 3 times now and it's a 4th time, you want to hear that backstory. You want to hear the little extra verbose information about them because you have decided you enjoy their company. You enjoy talking to them, hearing from them, and so your bandwidth increases.
Yes.
For what you want from that person and that relationship in your life. And I think characters in books are relationships in our lives.
Yes.
For me, I mean, I attach to characters and I care what's going to happen and I think about them. And
well, and that's the point of reading, is to attach and to be like enamored with this, that you're so in it and you're invested and you want to know what happens and you care about this character and you want to go, you know, have a cup of tea with them and discuss further. And that is the point, you know, when you're reading, is to really be in the world so much that you can just feel that person sitting next to you. That's really cool.
And I also think it's a little intimidating too. I always get a little intimidated when I hear that because it's like, how do I do that? And so it helps me a lot. Instead of looking at it as a whole, sometimes if I zone in on a scene and I'm like, okay, what emotion do I want to show in this scene? What's the core part? What's the one thing I'm revealing in this particular scene?
Yeah.
And that helps me because then it's not so overwhelming as I have to make them so interesting and engaging that everyone wants to be best friends with them. I want to go hide under a rock when I start looking at it like that because I'm like, I can't do that. I'm not that kind of person. How am I supposed to create a person like that? But then if I like zone in on the scene and I'm like, okay, let's just look at this scene by scene. And this scene, I want to reveal how they handle this phobia.
Yeah.
And the emotions of fear, and maybe hint at how this fear started. And that's what this scene is about. And I sit down and I look at these little scene emotions or whatever, and I look back. I'm like, okay, so I've revealed this, this, and this. I've already revealed the fear. So 4 chapters later, when the fear comes up again, I don't need to go into it as much, but I can pull some of the tics from it and build upon it. And it's hopefully things that are relatable to people.
Yes.
And I think that's a really good trick too, relatable things. But I'm hopping topics real quick. So I'll just finish up and be like, go super small into the scene and look at it one emotion at a time, one reveal at a time. Don't try and reveal your whole character in one scene or one chapter.
Right.
So, yeah.
How are they going to react to this one thing? We don't need to know everything, just this one.
And then moving on to the relatable topic.
Yes.
And it's not just their strengths, their flaws. Oh, I love character flaws.
Yes, absolutely. Because real people have real flaws.
They do.
We all do. Every one of us has flaws. We are not perfect. Do you know what do you remember? Okay, what do you know the term for perfect characters?
Oh, I always forget it. Like Mary Sue?
Yep, that's the one.
Mary Sue.
So there's Mary Sue characters, and you'll hear somebody, because somebody said this to me a couple of times, and I was like, what the hell is a Mary Sue character? And I had to go look it up because somebody was calling my character Mary Sue. And I realized Well, I mean, it was kind of true, you know, to a point. It was. But there was a reason behind it. And it was like, okay, yeah, it does seem perfect, but it's not. Keep reading. Like, I promise. Like, there's problems here. And I hope I fixed it. We'll see how it goes. But it just means, but your character is perfect. Like, there's nothing wrong with them ever. They are a flawless human being. And that is not a relatable character. And people don't really like that because you don't want to meet somebody that is so damn perfect that there are no skeletons in their closet. There's nothing that is wrong with them because there just has to be. It makes them interesting. Like, why would you want to meet somebody that was flawless?
React to every situation perfectly. They're always the bigger person in every situation.
Yes.
They're always the one who comes up with the solution, with the answer. They're always the person who saves the day.
Yes. You want to see those people fall just to see how they react. Because, I mean,
Tell us
how
you
can
really
somebody
feel.
be perfect? Well, I mean, how can you be perfect and not have ever felt disappointment or, you know, somebody's wrath kind of thing? You know, if everybody loves you and puts you on a pedestal that you deserve to be on, like, how can you feel what other people feel? How can you be somebody that is a human, you know, that has had really horrible things happen to them and has had to define themselves from it?
I think that's a big part of just being human is making mistakes, messing up, learning.
Exactly.
And getting back up and keep going. So it's very satisfying to see characters do that because we're like, oh, I know how that feels.
Yeah.
And
that was a
you
mistake.
cheer
That was
for
a
them.
mistake.
Yeah.
Right? Like, oh,
Don't do
crap.
that. Don't do that. No, they did it.
They
All
did.
right. How are we going to get out of this? How are we going to fix
Exactly.
this?
Now what's going to happen? Because, yeah, you did that. Oh, it did. So it's just, and you feel for those. And those are sometimes, I feel like, some of the most captivating characters is, you know, they have done something really bad. And you're like, dude, I don't know how you're going to get yourself out of this one. I'm going to keep reading to find out because damn, you just here's a shovel. Like, oh my God, like you are in a pile of it right now, buddy. Woof. And it's really fun to watch how that morphs and what they can do to fix it, because Protagonist, you're going to want to fix it. You know, you can't just be like, well, I mean, I guess that makes a villain potentially or somebody else, but you don't want that person just lie down and be like, well, I'm just going to be here on the ground from now on because that was that.
And as everything in life, balance. So you can go too far.
Yes.
So if the entire, like the character never makes a good choice, always is messing everything up and still leading the story and running it.
Yes, and doesn't really learn from it. But everybody, like, I understand characters being who they are and having to be accepted for it. I do not understand it when a character is so very, very flawed and everybody's like, okay, I guess that's just who you are. And then somehow that's okay. Like, you need to learn from some of these flaws, right?
Definitely. I
like
absolutely agree. And I think that has to do with, too, you should be looking at your character arc. And so this is where, for me, when I'm trying to figure out who my character is in the beginning of the story and who they are at the end of the story, they need to have, like, they'll learn lots of different things and I'll, you know, expose different things about them, but there should be one big lesson that they've learned. Mm-hmm. And so my opening scene and ending scene in the book should focus around what that lesson is, and they should be able to show in the opening and closing scene the difference in the character.
Yes.
And that one lesson is braided into my theme.
Yeah. So
that's the whole, like, the biggest message in the story is this one thing that the character arc learned, and it's all with the protagonist. And I'll start a story and I'll think, this is my theme, this is the message I want to give, and I get going, halfway, 3/4 of the way through, I'm like, that is not my theme.
Drat!
That is not my theme, because my main character and all the characters around them keep talking about this other theme and this other message and this bigger thing that they're learning, and I did not know the story was about that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're going to have to tweak that a little bit in the beginning when I go back for editing, but let's keep going.
I think that's okay, though, because I think that is something about the editing process. And it goes back to, you know, you can't just write a draft and have it be done, right? That's not a possibility. You can't just be like, I finished a book.
That.
It's true. Yay, I finished a book. I'm going to send it out. But I try to think of, like, what I do for a protagonist through my edit. So, like, I write my book. Even if I plotted, even if I pantsed, whatever. My book is finished, right? Has a first page, has a last page, it has a full arc, it's done. And then I go back in my edit and I go, crap, he is inconsistent here and here and here. And so I change the consistency points. I make sure that something like theme has been announced and is prevalent and makes sense consistently through the entire book. And then I go in and do stuff like adding details, because for me, I'm really light on my scene details in my first draft, I tend to be, and I need to go in and be like, look at this lovely white screen they're walking around on. I should probably make it something cool. And so I go in and add details and things like that that matter to the protagonist. And then after that, I go in and start doing like language and making sure that there are certain things that they say that's consistent. Silly things. Is it a T or is it a T-shirt? Do they talk in alliteration? All kinds of different stuff. I make sure that that's there too. So it's like this developmental, like you just have to keep going when you're figuring these things out and keep adding to it. So it's not something I would expect in a first draft for you to nail every second of your theme or to nail your character's backstory. I could see that being development after reading it a couple times and being like, oh, that's what I meant there. That's why I put that weirdness right there. Oh, it's because of this. Oh, okay, go back and forth.
I do always like when I'm starting my first draft things that I do want to know religion beliefs, cultural upbringing, and geographic and time, like where they were raised and where they live now.
Sure.
I feel like those things, if I don't know those things and I don't find them out to the end, it's so much more editing to go back because the whole character changes with those building blocks.
Yes.
And so, like, the fun things, like the favorite swear words and the allergies to certain foods, and that's fun. But I would definitely say that's frosting stuff.
Yeah.
I think the upbringing, the people in their family and relationships with them, religious and cultural beliefs, those are, I think, the foundation that you have to know before you start your first draft.
Yeah, you have to have who they are. You have to at least start with a person.
A person who has some type of flavor to them.
Yes.
I love using the word flavor for characters.
I think it makes sense. I mean, it's true, though. Because there's different spices that go into those flavors.
There is. And I'm not saying, like, I have to... I tend to always pull, for me personally, my protagonists will usually have a cultural or heritage thing that runs in my family. I'm really big on heritage stuff. So I love pulling that into my protagonist and seeing how it threads through the story and the setting and the verbiage. It just makes my heart so happy. I don't think the readers care for those details as much as I do, but oh my goodness, do I enjoy writing them. And that's something I have to watch myself on, because I have to go back in editing and be like, okay, you were clearly indulging in this section right here just for yourself. Let's trim this up a little bit. We could probably lose 80% of this.
Well, I don't know if that's a problem, though, because you hear the term write what you know, which I think is both good and terrible at the same time, because you can't know how to walk on the moon, but you can sure enough go research it and figure out what it feels like and try to describe it and make it part of your story, right? You don't know how to do that, but you can write about it. But at the same time, are there aspects to that character that you do know? Are they like you at a certain point in your life? Is their character traits, did they have a career that you did? Did they come across the same problems that you did? That's what you know. And that's a very realistic part that you can put into your stories. So I agree with you on that. It's like, I think that heritage and culture and different things that you personally have experienced should go into your writing. You don't need to know everything, but you need to know enough. And you can write about those things and understand them, or you can research the heck out of them and really understand them as almost, not as good as you could if you were there, but enough, and really focus on the stuff that you do understand completely.
And that can happen even when you're writing fantasy or...
Yes.
I mean, I write fantasy, and so my characters usually have some way to control or use magic, some superpower ability, which obviously I can't relate to that. But I can give them some trait or some experience that I do relate to. And that's kind of fun. And I think there's little pieces of myself in all different pieces of my protagonists.
Yes.
Because they're not me fully, but there's little pieces in them.
Well, yeah. And I mean, even if you're writing fantasy or sci-fi in an alien world, there's still humanistic qualities. And as you are a human, you know how to human. And it can be wild and different, and a different culture, a different world, completely unexpected. But at the same time, it relates to something that somebody can grasp onto because they are also human. That and being described as such, really immersing somebody into a world and into a person is the ultimate goal. So you don't have to know it completely, but there's certain aspects that you should kind of get. But I enjoy that part too. I enjoy throwing pieces of my past or pieces that I'd like to know more about myself. Though I'll go and look up something and be like, I did this part, but I never really thought about it past here. Let's see what I would have been in 10 years if I would have continued on that path. What does that look like? And then go and throw a character into that situation. That's really fun.
I love just digging in, and I love putting all the different types of diversity I can play with characters around my protagonist, and then have my protagonist learn about those different diversity, different cultures, different how they react. And they don't always act perfectly. They stumble sometimes in learning and how to say things, or sometimes they'll accidentally say something offensive or not. There's bigger messages in the diversity in our world, and me showing that in my story and showing it through how my protagonist handles all the diversity around them.
Yes.
And the relationships they develop with all of these hugely different people.
Yes.
And that's fun too, because that shows a lot about your protagonist. They don't have to be great about it.
No,
maybe they
have to learn from
struggle
it.
with certain types of personalities, and they're surrounded by those, and they have to deal with that throughout. These are real issues that we're dealing with in the world, and I can put that into my fantasy book where they're shooting fireballs at each other. But maybe they're shooting fireballs because they don't like people with rainbow mohawks.
Maybe.
Right? And so they have to learn about each other and figure things out and stop throwing fireballs. And sure, I don't know anyone there are rainbow mohawks out there. And if you're one of those people, I'm sure it looks lovely. I'm not against rainbow mohawks.
I embrace rainbow mohawks at all opportunities.
But but it is symbolic for things happening in the world and bigger issues. And I like tackling that type of stuff with my protagonist as well. And I usually have my protagonist learn and ways to show positive things in the world.
Yes.
And I think that's one thing that distinguishes the protagonist from the antagonist.
It's always like this little underlying moment of hope.
Yeah, like the hope that we want for the world.
Yep.
The things that we hope will happen. It's satisfying to see it or to read it happen in a story. And to see the protagonist triumph over that particular issue.
And to learn from it and to teach. Yes, absolutely.
So that's really fun stuff to dig in. And a lot of times the antagonist, well, I won't go too much into the antagonist because we have a whole episode.
I know how much you love antagonists.
But
that's next week.
But your antagonist will generally be fighting for, in their mind, the thing that's right is not what's going to be right to the general public.
Yes.
Your protagonist at their core is probably going to be fighting for something that the general public would embrace and want you to.
Yeah.
And so that's something to think of too when you're giving them flaws and you're giving them strengths. Make sure one of their biggest strengths is something that the general whole is going to be on board with.
I would agree with that. Make them realistic and make them something that somebody can relate to or at least understand. They might not be able to relate to it, but sometimes I love those stories where I cannot relate to this character, but I get it. I can see how it can happen.
And logical and how they got to that point in those choices.
It makes sense, but it's not something that I would ever find myself being like or really understanding, but I can see it and I'm I can empathize and be like, oh, okay, I get it. Wow. That's really neat. That's sort of those light bulb moments those are always very impressive to me. So
yeah, when you can see a different perspective that you didn't think you would ever understand. And then after the book and being in that point of view, you're like, I kind of get it now.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's, again, achieving a character like that. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
The pressure, I don't go into it being like, I'm going to create this character and do this.
Right.
It's scene by scene, guys. Reveal something different and new, scene by scene.
Yeah. Yes.
Have a goal and idea where you're going in the main lesson and the arc that you want to hit, and be open to the fact that that goal may entirely change several times throughout.
Possible.
As stories
Editing
tend to do.
Is where it's at. But as long as you have a finished arc and you have a character and you have a beginning and an end, you have something to work with now. it might be a blob of clay, but you're going to make it into something really, really beautiful at that point. And it's going to be great.
And it's, it can be overwhelming too if you're going through and trying to do all of these things all at once.
Yeah.
So for me, it helps when Poppy was talking about when she goes through with editing, she does a different thing that she focuses on with each round of editing. I do that too. I'll make myself a list of this is what I want to do in this round. And I try to just focus on that.
Yes.
And it will shift and change things a lot of times.
Yep.
And then as I'm doing that, and if I get distracted by other things I want to fix, the fun stuff like all the swearing or the verbiage or the tics, I can get distracted and do that. Or I'll make myself a list for like, okay, next round, touch this, this, and this. So I stay focused on finishing. Because if you try to do it all at once, I think sometimes
it's overwhelming.
You can get lost in that.
Well, and you just keep redoing like the first 5 chapters because you learn something new and you learn something new and you learn something new. So you keep going back and being like, but I know this new thing. And then you never get past chapter 8 because you can't keep fixing it. You can't stop yourself from doing it. Just get it down and then start molding it. Finish your work. And then you can go in and tweak.
And if you wait till the end and just get through the end, instead of having that one new thing that you learned that you want to put into the first 5 chapters, now you'll have like 8 new things that you learned. And so instead of going through those 5 chapters 8 times for each of those new things you've learned, you're going to do it all at once.
Yes.
That's going to help you a little bit with getting it done, right? Because I don't want to have just first 5 chapters that are great.
No,
I think
a whole story
novel would be more satisfying to produce.
Absolutely. So great. Okay.
Any other protagonist gems that you got for us?
No, I was just trying to think. I just love people. I just love people. I love writing people, and it's just so much fun. And I just love quirky, interesting traits. And I'm trying to think of, there's just so many protagonists I love for their traits. And it's just so, but I think all of them are just consistent and sell it. And they know who they are to a certain point. And sometimes they don't, and they learn from it. But they know what their core is, and they don't change from that core. And I just think those are the best.
I think that you just found our challenge for this episode.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. I think our challenge to you for this episode is to go out onto social media, #PunchKeys, and tell us who your favorite protagonist is, and tell us a strength and a weakness that they have.
I like it.
Your favorite strength and weakness. It's got to be like why you love that character. I want a strength and a weakness. No, not just one or the other. I want both.
Yep.
I'm needy. I want it all. Yeah, make sure you say the book that they're from, too. So maybe you'll give me some good books to go read.
Seriously.
That I haven't read yet.
Gosh, who am I going to pick? I have like 5 off the top of my head. I'm going to think about it. It's going to be great. We're going to do it, too.
Deal. There's so many yummy ones. And if you can't decide, then I guess you'll just have to do it 3 different times for 3 different characters. I don't know.
That's a good point. I could probably do that. That's no problem.
But it's really important, too, when you're looking at how to create a protagonist or how to do any type of aspect of storytelling. It's super smart to look at what's been done before and what you love. So all of your favorite books and how they tackled it. Look at your favorite characters. Look at their strengths and weaknesses and the messages of the books and see if you can't find a pattern in what you're drawn to, what you like.
Yes.
And it's so much more fulfilling to write stories about characters that you love.
Absolutely. Love it.
All right. Punch the damn keys.
Punch the keys. Write those awesome characters. We will see you next time.
Thank you so much for hanging out with us. And if you liked this episode, please subscribe and give us that clickable 5-star love.
Got writer questions or feedback? Reach out through our website. And until next time, make sure to punch the keys.